Hey guys, in this video I'll show you how I replaced the front pads and rotors on my 2014 Toyota Corolla. This video is intended for informational purposes only, so when replacing your brakes, make sure to always follow your vehicle manufacturer's instructions. To see how I lifted the front end of the car and removed the wheel, check out the video linked up in the cards. I'll remove the brake caliper first by taking out the two 14mm bolts. And now pry between the bracket and caliper with a screwdriver to get the caliper off. I'll hang the caliper above on the spring. It should never be allowed to hang down on the brake hose. Now I'll remove the pads. It's normal for inner pads to wear out faster than outer pads a little bit, but excessive wear usually indicates there's a problem. Low quality pads could cause uneven wear, or a problem such as pad seizing in the bracket, the caliper piston or pin seizing, or a problem in the hydraulic system. So let's remove the brake pads and see if they were seized. So that one's a little bit stuck. And that one came out quite easily. Ideally they should have both came out easily, but they weren't too bad. Now I'll remove the caliper mounting bracket by taking out the two 17mm bolts. These bolts can be quite tight, so I'm going to loosen them with a long wrench first. And now I can remove them easily. I'll slide the bracket off and remove the rotor. Next, I'll clean the mounting bracket and lubricate the pins. I'll start by removing the support plates to clean the rust underneath. Cleaning this rust up is important because it bubbles up and over time it pushes up on the plates, which end up squeezing the pad in. Once it's clean, I'll brush on some lubricant to prevent future rust, and I'm being careful to grease only the area under the plates. The lubricant I'm using is a synthetic silicone, which is rubber safe, and it has worked great for me in the past. Some brake lubricants are not rubber safe, and they'll cause rubber to swell, so it's important to use the correct one. There are a few popular brands of synthetic silicone that I recommend. I'll have links to them down below. And now I'll install the new support plates that came with the brake pads, making sure to position them the same as before. And just press them back in. Now I'll brush on a thin layer of lubricant to help the pad slide easier. Next, I will lubricate the sliding pins and put in new rubber boots. I do this every 2 years or whenever I change the brakes to prevent the pins from seizing up. The new boots will seal much better against moisture than the old boots, and the boot kit also comes with a rubber gasket at the end of the sliding pins, which I think is also a good idea to replace. So I'll pull the sliding pins out and pull the boots out. Now I will lubricate each pin and push it back in the bracket, which will bring fresh lubricant inside. This can be repeated a few times to replace the old dirty grease inside the bracket. Next, I'll install the new boots. I'll lubricate both ends of the boot first, and the lubricant will help create a tighter seal that will prevent moisture from getting in. When a pin seizes up, it happens because moisture gets in past the boot, so this step is very important. And now I'll put the boot in the bracket and make sure that it's seated properly. I'll do the same for the other boot, lubricate both ends, and put it back in the bracket. Before installing the pins, I'm going to add some extra lubricant in the top groove of the pin, and I already put in a new rubber gasket at the bottom of the pin, which came with the boot kit. The pin with the rubber gasket should go into the bottom of the bracket. To insert this pin, I'm going to gently wiggle it until the gasket slides past the boot. Forcing it in can break the gasket, or it can cause the gasket to slide out of place and up on the pin. Once it's in, I'll check that the gasket didn't slide up and press it back all the way down. Here's an old gasket I tried to reuse that broke just by pushing it in too hard. Now I'll remove the air trapped in the boot, put a flat screwdriver between the boot and pin, and press the pin down. And I'll do the same thing on the other pin. Before reinstalling the rotor, make sure that the hub surface is flat and there's no excess rust buildup. I'll clean the rotor using brake cleaner. Even though it looks clean, it might still have some grease on it. Now I'll put the rotor on. The mounting bracket goes on next. I'll start by putting in the top bolt. And now slide the bracket over the rotor and align it with the bolt. And now put in the bottom bolt and then torque them down to specification. Next, I will get the caliper ready. I will clean it up and then retract the piston. I'm just cleaning up the dust boot now, so I don't push dirt back in when I retract the piston. And I'll sand off the rust at the end of the piston. The surface should be as flat as possible to press on the pad evenly. Note that I covered the rotor to keep the dirt off. Since my pads wore out unevenly, I'm going to check for rust on the caliper piston by pulling up the rubber boot. So that looks pretty good, it's nice and clean. There might be some rusting further down that I can't see, but I'm pretty happy with that. When retracting the piston, brake fluid will be pushed back into the fluid reservoir, so it's important to make sure that the fluid doesn't overflow. I'll take off the hood seal first and undo the two clips holding the cover in place. So the fluid level is a bit below the max mark, which is good. If it was at the max or above, there's a good chance it will overflow when the piston is retracted. To retract the piston, I have a caliper wind back tool. This is the best tool for this job in my opinion. I'll center the tool over the piston and turn it until the piston's all the way back in. Once the end is reached, it will be very noticeable because it won't turn easily anymore. Keep in mind that the pistons on the rear brakes have to be pushed and turned clockwise at the same time while retracting them, so without this tool it will be very difficult to change the rear brakes. Alright, so I reached the end. I'll turn it the other way and remove the tool. So the piston is now flush with the caliper housing, indicating that it's fully retracted. I'll brush some lubricant on the end of the piston. And I'll also clean the area opposite of the piston. It should be as flat as possible to make sure that it presses on the pad evenly. Next, I'll reinstall the pads. This is the backing plate of the pad, which has two ears that mount the pad into the bracket. And this is the friction surface, which rubs against the rotor to slow the car down. It's very important that all pads are installed with the friction surface towards the rotor. Installing them backwards is extremely dangerous because the car will not stop properly. I'll put on the wear indicator clips first. They will make a squealing noise when the pads wear out completely. They should be installed on the top ears of the pad, but some pads don't come with them or even have a slot for them, so if you want to have them, make sure to buy the proper pads. When aligning them, there's a small tab on the clip which should snap into the indent on the back of the pad. And now just push them on the ear of the pad until they click in place. So there it goes, that one just clicked in. Now I'll install the other one on the top ear of the inner pad. Same alignment as before. And I'll push it on. And that one clicked in too. So here are the pads with the clips on. Next I'm going to install them in the bracket. This is the outer pad. I'll align the curvature of the pad with that of the rotor. Make sure the friction surface faces toward the rotor and the indicator clip is on top. Now just push the pad in the bracket. Here's a close-up of the indicator clip in the bracket. Same thing on the inner side, indicator clip on top, friction surface goes towards the rotor, and put the pad in. Now put a thin layer of lubricant on the back of the pads, making sure not to grease anything else. Now I'll reinstall the caliper, making sure that the brake hose is not twisted. I'm gonna slide it on. Press the pins down to get it all the way in. Put the bolts back in. And I'll torque the bolts down to specification. So I have the new brakes installed. I will reinstall the wheel and lower the car down next. Now I'll start the engine, and before driving, it's important to press the brake pedal down a few times to adjust the caliper piston to the new pads. I'll go for a test drive next. I made sure that I have the bracket and caliper bolts torqued, the wheel lug nuts are torqued, the brake fluid level is between minimum and maximum, and I didn't forget anything under the car or under the hood. So I'm gonna do a really slow speed stop first. And now I'll stop from a higher speed. As the car stops, I'm checking that the braking is smooth and perfectly even. If it feels like the car is pulling to one side while driving or while applying the brakes, there's something definitely wrong, so the brakes should be inspected immediately. Now I'm gonna check for leaks and overheating. So I don't feel any excess heat coming off the wheel here. If there's a lot of heat after a short drive, it would indicate that the brakes are dragging. And I also don't see any fluid leaking on the ground or inside the rim. If you like this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel. I'll be posting more car, home, and other interesting videos in the future. Thanks for watching!